So let's say you went to France and you met a man who told you, I'm a proud Frenchman and I'm willing to die for my country. And you took that man to Peru, and within 1 week, he told you, I'm a proud Peruvian and I'm willing to die for my country. And then you took him to Zimbabwe, and within 1 week, he told you, I'm a proud Zimbabwean and I'm willing to die for my country. You took him to Mongolia, and he did the same thing, and so on, and so on, and so forth. Well, you would conclude there's something irrational about this man's approach to creating self-identity, right? Something sort of arbitrary about it. Well, it turns out that whether we're talking about, one country or 10 countries or 1,000 countries, the arbitrariness is the same. It's a geographical accident, basically. And so if you think about it, most of our sources of self-esteem, of identity in society, whether it's your job, your hobby, your family, some general zeitgeist of the culture, like the idea of progress, or it could be, a particular activist pursuit, or it could be a subculture like punk rock or whatever it is, all of that has that sort of same level of arbitrariness. And there's a reason why that in some ways is an undermining of your identity, because the identity that you have assumes that you are separate from your environment. Otherwise, you wouldn't have an identity. You would be a complete reflex. There would be no difference between you and the environment, right? And so the reflexiveness of the environment kind of undermines the idea of your identity, of your significance as an individual. And so if we are reflex-driven creatures, then there's a certain irrationality to our sense of identity. And this is something that Ernest Becker talked about, Ernest Becker being the writer of The Denial of Death, a Pulitzer-winning book. And so how to counter this to some extent? Now, it's impossible to counter it completely because, we simply do not choose a whole bunch of stuff that we happen to be born into, the body we're born into, the environment. But within that, we can maximize our independence, reduce the reflexiveness. And so how to do that? Well, this is a tricky question, but I would say that Becker talked about at least two ways of doing this. Sort of the largest possible way, and then sort of the smaller day-to-day way of doing it. The smaller way would be, first of all, to start with common sense realizations. Like if your culture happens to engage in beliefs and practices that are harmful, especially to yourself, then in some sense, that's an irrational pursuit, is an irrational cultural development. So one thing could be food. If your culture, like American culture, is all about, burgers and fries and hot dogs, well, then that's irrational, right? It does not comport with the ideas of nutrition that keep us healthy and in a better state of health and well-being. So that could generalize, is it pragmatic? Is your particular self-identity leading to outcomes that are pragmatic? Then the largest possible sense would be the idea of, look, if all these ways of gaining self-esteem and identity are an illusion or are just feeble, flimsy stuff, who cares whether you're born here or there? Why should you feel proud? Why should you be proud of all the things that other animals do? Like ants construct, homes, and they have all kinds of things they do that are pretty impressive in some ways, but they don't really feel proud about it. And then if we compare ourselves, some of our achievements, like if we, have a family, or if we are able to, construct a home, or whatever it is that other animals also do, we don't like to compare ourselves to them, because in that comparison, we realize the illusion of seeing ourselves as important, because we think, hey, some cockroach is doing some of the same stuff I'm doing, and I don't feel like that's so important. I can just squash that roach, and I wouldn't think about it twice, you see. So our sense of significance is undermined once we compare ourselves to other animals. And so only in the sort of narrowness of sort of a tunnel vision, we can see ourselves as important, kind of if the universe becomes really tiny, we can become sort of like the small the big fish in the small pot, right? But once you broaden your vision and realize, hey, you are a small fish in a big pot, right? Then that in some sense is more rational. It's less arbitrary, and so Becker, in that regard, talked about the idea of some creative force in the universe. Some people call it God and so on. But he spoke against religion, because religion comes up with all these ideas and all these stories that are basically made up, clearly made up, clearly not rational. But he said, if you just look at this tremendous creative force in the universe, what is your identity based on that? On that large force? Do you have any meaning to your life? Do you have any identity based on that? And obviously there's not much there to grasp onto, right? There's no answers to that. It's like, gee, you look at the universe and it doesn't look like you have all that much meaning. But there's where the only possible truly real sense of identity, according to him, that could be real, or could really grant you some meaningful significance. That's the only way to get it. You're not going to get it from like being, winning a hot dog eating championship. I mean, that's so feeble, and most of the stuff that humans do is really overblown. We basically grant all this importance to it. A singer, great singer, you think, oh wow, this guy is a god. Well, it's just imagine an ant emitting some sounds. I mean, that's all it is, emitting a few sounds, and yet we put those people on a pedestal. That sort of generalizes. Or being a famous football player, put the ball through the, I mean, it's simply kind of feeble and meaningless. So you can't really look at that and say, wow, that really describes or is truly great in some sense. That really, the sense of identity is rock solid. Or even some great artist. I mean, who's the greatest artist of all time? Some people say Michelangelo. Okay, so what did he do? Mostly, paint other humans. So you imagine an ant, right? An ant that was painting other ants, making little statues of other ants. And you say, well, what is this crap? And you say, well, look, he painted those ants really nicely, really accurately, really beautifully. Well, who cares? But so that's the sense in which you look at humans, even the greatest talent out there, like Michelangelo, and you say, well, this is meaningless. There's no sense of identity that is really solid or great based on this stuff. Right? The only way to truly, get it would be to look at the universe, right? That would be and of course that is, you're betting, because there's no assurance. There's no assurance that the universe can provide you with a sense of significance. But according to Becker, that would be the only way to maximally reduce our reflexiveness, of the environment, being simply a reflex of the environment, looking at the largest possible framework and saying, well, look at this creative force, tremendous creative force out there, and where do I fit in that picture? And there's no easy answers to that. But if you can somehow derive an answer from that, you would also reduce your attachment to these other smaller sources of identity, in his view, because we need an identity. We need self-esteem. Otherwise, according to him and according to terror management theory, we're going to succumb in anxiety and even terror. And so if you got to put your chips somewhere, he thinks that we should put some of our chips into this larger context and try to derive a sense of identity based on that. And that way also we don't get, trapped in all this small shit in this world, all these little sources of identity and self-esteem that we fight over, that are at the end of the day not only feeble and meaningless, but counterproductive.